Hello, my name is Ngom Gafor, and I edit Africally Speaking. With some of the world's most prominent economies, expanding markets, and a large young population, Africa is poised for global leadership. But security risks remain a threat to its progress. From Al-Shabaab attacks in Kenya to Boko Haram bombings in Nigeria and neighboring countries, terrorism is proving an increasing challenge for the continent. As its leaders seek assistance internationally, security experts David Otto, Chris Samuel, and Raphael Akazara argue that Africa's solutions lie within its borders. At the University of East London, I sat down with David Otto and Chris Samuel. My education on imaginative counter-terrorism started with an explanation of what their company, TGS, is about. David Otto and Chris Samuel. So David, you're the counter-terrorism analyst of TGS, and you've also got Chris Samuel, who's the intelligence director and strategic manager. Now your third partner is Raphael Akazara, the director of investigation and operational affairs, who unfortunately isn't with us today. But I just wanted to start first by asking you, what is TGS? And how did it come about?
TGS stands for Tedric Global Security Consultants. And it came about in 2008 when three of us, that's Christopher Samuel, Raphael Akazara, and myself, David Otto, we went to the same university, which is the University of East London. And we were studying. We were four during that period studying law and criminology. And during our studies, we thought, well, let us come up with something which is going to reflect the issues that Africans have in terms of security and see how we can represent African solutions provided by African solution providers.
Okay, excellent. And this could be to both of you, really. One of the things that I saw when I was looking at your website, you basically said TGS plugs a gap in security.
Yes.
Security is a big issue now with everything that's going on in the Middle East, the US, UK, everywhere. So in terms of Africa, in terms of what you do, what is the gap that you plug in security?
We bridge the gap between the Western expert and African experts.
Okay, excellent.
Take, for example, the issue of counter-terrorism. The leaders, or African leaders, believe that the problem cannot be solved by, maybe, people back in Africa. So they come to the West.
Yes.
We're saying it shouldn't be so. We have to be there.
Exactly.
And then be the bridge between the African expert and the Western expert. So if there's anything that maybe, let's say, for example, that we need, we should be the platform.
Exactly.
In which, the African will be able to, African government will be able to say, oh, TGS, we have certain problem, you understand, if it's something that we believe that maybe it cannot be done by the expert that we know back in Africa, then we can reach out to the Western world, rather than coming to them all the time.
Okay, no, that's
because
very
if you look at it, they have not been able to solve their own problem here, so.
Yes. So that's very interesting, because, so what do you think you guys have that a Western expert is missing?
Let me take that. Yes. What we have as TGS is that we have the local knowledge of how things are done in Africa, and also we have the Western understanding, experience, and educational background that is needed in the field of security. That Africans who are based in Africa do not have that background. So entirely what we're doing is we are the in-betweeners.
Okay.
So in terms of the local expertise in understanding how things operate in Africa and the kind of solutions that will suit the people of Africa, we have that knowledge. And then in terms of understanding the framework of security solutions, we also fit that bill. So what we provide is, we provide both sides of the continent with a one solution that is adaptable to the problems of Africa.
Excellent. So you run a program called CISO,
yes.
Step In, Step Out,
yes. Okay.
which is a very good, I think from what I understand, CISO is aims to tackle terrorism from the root causes.
Yeah.
So,
soft solution.
Exactly,
Yeah.
soft solutions. So I think you operate in several parts of Africa.
Yes.
What I'm really interested in, people offer so many theories
Yes.
as to why people get radicalized. But what do you find to be a common thread if across Cameroon, Nigeria, Kenya, wherever you go? What is that one thing that makes a young person or even somebody a little older want to pick up arms?
Well, the common denominator for that is, I'll say, poverty.
Yeah.
You know, we had a conference here back in May, where I specifically hosted a workshop on Almajiri. The destitute that roam the streets
Okay,
in the northern
yes.
part of Nigeria and I guess northern part of Cameroon as well. You know, when you have well over maybe 10 to 16 million kids that ought to be in school are not in school, you know, and then the vulnerability factors is there. You know, so if there's any issue with terrorism, those are the soft solution that needs to be addressed. You know, you need to see how you can mop all these children away from the street.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
because if you don't mop them, then you will not be able to tackle terrorism adequately.
Okay, excellent.
You know, so what the CISO program offer is the step-in, step-out solutions. We want to find out the underlying reason why people step into radicalization, and then offer them a way out.
Okay.
So that's what that step-in, step-out solution is all about.
Excellent. So one of the things that I was horrified to find out about really is that you've talked about the issues in Africa, but apparently we also have a situation in the African diaspora, in the UK, for example, where there are fears about homegrown terror.
Yes.
You know, you're seeing young people with affiliations to Muslim countries joining all these radical
Terrorist
organizations. Yeah. I mean, how serious a problem is it for Africa? Because I remember going to an event and somebody was a speaker from AFORD, which you probably know, an African Development Organization. And he said, you know, this is a fear that maybe young people in the UK of African origin may start wanting to go to Nigeria, to Kenya. I thought, oh my goodness, how serious is this? How?
This is a particularly serious issue which we have spoken about in detail, because we have been to Nigeria and we've spent time with stakeholders. I mean, we've spent time with the local population, we've spent time with the local security services, and also here in the UK we've spent time with the African diaspora communities. And one of the things that we've been looking about is the idea which you've just spoken about homegrown terrorism and the foreign fighter trend, which means young Africans who live in the United Kingdom who find themselves as not belonging to the culture of the United Kingdom, and also find themselves as not being acceptable by African government, would be more dragged into the net, be more prone into being attracted to organizations like Boko Haram, who would be very, very willing to provide them with a space. So the idea of Africans in the diaspora going, for instance, to Nigeria, or going to Libya, or going to Cameroon, or going to Niger, or Chad, or Kenya, is something that has to be taken very, very seriously. We've spoken about that, saying that the concentration of the PREVENT program should not be targeted towards people going to Syria only, because
the
Asia community.
Yeah.
Boko Haram is now one of the most dangerous and deadliest terrorist organizations in the world as we speak. So, and they have a very, very strong base whereby young people who live in the United Kingdom would not mind going to join them in Nigeria, because the route to Syria is very, very tight. So Nigeria is a very, very vulnerable route,
Yeah.
So, and that means that it's very, very easy for young people to live here and go to Nigeria and be part of that group. And this is what we've experienced by traveling to these areas in northern Nigeria and northern Cameroon.
Oh, wow. So in terms of when you organized the event which you put together, and I know there were delegates from many different governments, how seriously is the UK government, which, let's face it, is the primary government of these young people traveling to Nigeria, how seriously are they taking this problem? How seriously are our embassies here taking this problem?
Well, I mean, I don't think the embassies have paid enough attention to what we're seeing back in May. Because even shortly after the conference, I think we won't send a letter to the president-elect that time to just highlight most of the problem that we highlighted during the conferences there. And then it's just unfortunate that most of it has come to pass, because my colleague Dave gave a very, very, very detailed analysis of the trend. And then even all these refugees crisis at that time, there is something that we've foreseen and that we spoke about during the conference as well. And then like maybe recently the attack that happened in France, we realized that maybe there was a terrorist that masquerade, as a refugee, came through Turkey and then in France. We spoke about it, but people don't pay attention to it. And the irony of that as well is that even during the conference, I don't think we have any. Do we have any representative from Nigeria?
I think we had a representative from Nigeria. Yes, but that representative, was meant to speak and come early to the conference, but that didn't happen for one reason or another. And as Chris is saying, the African governments are more, prone to reactive measures rather than proactive measures. And this is something we've actually been very, very vocal about. African governments have to be able to take responsibility, to address some of the issues that we've spoken about taking care of the African community, to ensure that, young people who are Africans, do not get themselves entangled in this area of radicalization and vulnerabilities. But when we had a conference, yes, there were a lot of international organizations and bodies, from the United Kingdom. Embassies, came from, it was attended by Western embassies more than by the African embassies, and this is something which, surprises us, because the Western governments are more interested in understanding what is happening in Africa and what is happening to the African communities in the UK than the African embassies themselves, so which is contrary to our expectations.
Exactly, that's something that seriously needs to be tackled.
It does.
So while the government front seems to be lagging in terms of specifically, particularly Africans, I should say, I know that through CISO you teach or you facilitate practical steps that young people who are thinking about becoming radicalized or have fallen into that dark world, really, we try and help them. So I want to know, for example, what do you do to try and prevent people from picking up arms and going to northeastern Nigeria to bomb somebody? And for those who have been and back, how do you help them to become part of society again?
The web in terms of radicalization is very, very complex, and what we've done is we've categorized young people within certain steps. So the solution that you provide to one young man has to be quite unique to their circumstances. So what we've done is, we've developed a 6-step process whereby we look at radicalization from the ordinary human's perspective. So saying people who are not yet radicalized, who are not vulnerable, should be tackled first by providing them with awareness programs. So when a young man becomes, a teenager, you need to make them to understand what is vulnerability. What are some of those things that, will lead them to vulnerability? So is it about racism? Is it about discrimination? Is it about poverty? Is it about your personal circumstances? Or is it about a young man who's been bullied in school? So you talk to them about these various avenues whereby, they can come to us and explain to us some of their problems that they're facing within the community, some of the problems that they face in schools, So that itself tackles the idea of vulnerability. Once, they've become vulnerable already, now they move into the process of being radicalized. Now, those vulnerabilities have now moved a step further into a process of radicalization, whereby, the young people are now susceptible to online and offline radicalization. In the UK, for instance, they are more likely than not to be radicalized online. But in the case of Africa, they are more likely than not to be radicalized offline, so in the streets. So what we do in terms of when a young man has been radicalized, whether it's online or offline, we look at the particular circumstances of that young man. We speak to them. Why did they get radicalized and how? So by understanding why and how they've been radicalized, we can now provide solutions. So for instance, if a young man says they've been radicalized because, they don't have the traditional support system, they have no parents or they have no role models to speak to, they have no education, or they have no viable options within the community that the government has been able to provide for them, what we do is we channel them towards different support systems that the United Kingdom has already developed. So if it is about inviting an imam to speak to them about interpretation, we would facilitate that. If it is about getting them back to school, we facilitate that. If it's about sending them through a social service system, we facilitate that. But that only happens depending on the circumstances of that young person.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of that, you know, then we move now to the next level, which if a young man has already been radicalized and he's become involved in extremism, you know, now what we have to understand is extremism should not only be seen from the Islamic perspective, you know, because, you know, various levels of right-wing, left-wing, animal activist extremism. But in the case of Islamic extremism, we would now be able to look at, you know, the role of powerful role models within the Islamic communities.
Yeah.
So we have liaisoned with different imams, whereby we can send young people, or we can invite them to speak to young people and find out where did they get it wrong. Because most of the times, you know, people become extreme because of interpretation of the Quran or the Hadith. So once that has been reinterpreted, and some of the fundamental problems of that young man has been resolved, most often than not, you find that this young man will get de-radicalized. So it is always a situation of looking at the particular problems of a particular young person and then look for that the solution that would be adapted to those problems. Now, if a young man is already engaged in terrorism, it's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
Because now you're not talking about prevention anymore, you're not talking about de-radicalization anymore, you're talking about disengagement. So disengagement is a situation whereby, you know, the young man has to stop performing violent extremism. So you get them away, you tell them the best way to stop violent extremism is not to use arms. The best way for you to channel your ideas is not to use arms. So we disengage them from becoming violent extremists.
How do you even get to them to be able to disengage them?
Well, it is very challenging. You know, one of the big issues that we face when it comes to de-radicalization or disengagement is what you call referrals. How do you get young people to be referred to you is one big problem that we always have. But, you know, we do work with communities. We do work with, you know, parents who possibly call us and say, you know, my son, you know, is going through this process, you know, can you help? You know, so we need referrals. You know, you go to prisons, you know, you go to various community groups where young people are free to give their experiences. And this is how you get referrals, understanding the problems that young men are facing. So when you speak about the disengagement part of it, this is the most difficult because this person has already been involved in criminality. So the due process has to come in. You know, you cannot do anything without the due process. Yeah, so that we understand that, you know, okay, the law has to take its course. But in terms of what we do, we would encourage that, you know, young men are disengaged. They go through our de-radicalization program. Then you address some of the vulnerabilities that, you know, actually led them to become involved in terrorism in the first place. And, you know, we have another stage which we call the counter-narrative stage. Yeah. Counter-narrative stage is essentially the stage whereby, you know, preachers who have been able to get young men, you know, preach to them, brainwash them into following radical ideas. You know, what we do is, you know, we get very, very powerful imams who are as powerful as those men and say, you know, can you actually reinterpret the Quran, you know, so that, you know, it can reflect what it actually reflects. So the counter-narrative stage is a stage whereby, you know, you fight, you know, terrorism from the online perspective. You also fight it from, you know, providing alternative arguments which are, you know, inclusive of social cohesion, arguments which, you know, are inclusive of interfaith communities. So in terms of the counter-narrative, that's very, very important. Because, you know, yeah, the counter-narrative aspect of it, actually, what it actually does is it puts the young person back into the track that the young person has been derailed from, in terms of understanding what the Quran and what the Hadith actually proclaims. Okay. So it is a stage which is quite huge. And, you know, in order for you to de-radicalize or disengage a young man, you know, is very, very difficult, but it takes time, but it has to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as you spoke, I also started thinking about, you read the stories of, you know, young girls now traveling to Syria, becoming, you know, ISIS brides and so on. I wonder, Chris, I'll ask you this. Is this something you're seeing in the African community as well, young girls trying to go out to Nigeria or Niger?
Well, I mean, It's not something that we've personally, seen, in Nigeria. But I mean, it's difficult to measure that in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
That everybody travel there. You don't know what they're going there for.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. Because the difficulty that we have in doing anything in Nigeria is that there's no framework.
Okay.
The framework that exists there enables people to know when they travel and things like that. Mm-hmm. It's everybody that lives in the system is like as if they have plate number attached to them.
That's true. That's true.
Those kind of thing doesn't exist.
Yeah.
In Nigeria, so we're trying to maybe help the government to maybe have a framework, a database system, to be able to know who's coming, who's going, what are they there for, and what is their intention. That's going to be the starting point for us to be able to know who's going to Nigeria to join maybe Boko Haram as a bride or anything.
Yeah. Absolutely. The challenges are there.